All right, thanks, Lucas, for joining us again for a quick follow-up podcast. So we had a couple questions submitted by viewers from our first podcast. We'll just address these questions really quick so the students can get some good answers to their questions as they move forward and potentially look into grad school positions in the future. First questions that we received was, do you think with the degree transition, the GA position will become obsolete? And if so, what recommendations do you have for athletic training students in the future?
Perfect. Well, that's a really good question. I've been considering it a lot lately because um, with the transition, there's a lot of working parts with it. But I really do believe in at least the next 5 years or so, and I don't know if I'm willing to bet outside of that, but you're going to have enough of a gap there where you're going to have people that are wanting to get their master's, I think, and they're already going to have that degree. So I think that you're going to see it phased out, but I don't think that at least initially it's going to be that big of a deal, mainly because you're going to talk about all these programs, specifically small programs where they have depended on paying these graduate assistants very little money. And so they still need us. And so that's going to be an interesting transition. And I don't really know all the inner details of that, other than the fact that it's never been a better time to be an athletic trainer. I think you're going to see a lot more full-time faculty positions. And although institutions and universities and such are going to have to pay more for us, I think that when you give an athletic trainer, when you give them an opportunity to actually have a full-time role where they can make good money, it's going to work both ways because you're going to have a lot more of continuity of care. So I would say don't fret too much, but we're definitely, I think, all in it together where we're really going to see, I think, some big changes here, even in the next 5 years, if not less.
Do you know much about the residency model? Have you talked with many people about that?
No, a ton about the residency model, other than the fact that I know that there are several athletic trainers that, even in the doctorate, have thought about that because it's just a little different. It gives you a full immersion into some different programs and how Katie has that. I think that you're going to see that grow even more, and you're going to have even more like really precise settings that you're going to be able to look at, and that's something that I'm looking forward to. That seeing how that is going to maybe kind of take the place, if not be complementary to other graduate assistant positions that are kind of going to be transitioning, I think.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of ideas come up and if additional positions like that sprout up as well.
For
We
sure.
had,
It's only going to work out though, I think, if we can make sure that we're paying them appropriately.
absolutely, that's a big key to it all. One of the next questions we had was, um, this was a follow-up to one of the statements that you had talked about, or one of the points you talked about with factors influencing grad school choices. And an individual asked if you had other family factors that played into your decision for grad school outside of a significant other.
Honestly, for me, that was my main concern. Just because with my family, I knew that they'd be supportive of pretty much whatever I did. But I really do think that it wasn't until after I was in Ohio, and it wasn't until I hadn't seen them in a couple of months, like my extended family, my cousins, my aunt, my uncles, that I realized, holy cow, I really miss them. So I think that's something that even some of the best of us, we like to think we're not going to miss our families. I think that we sometimes, especially if we live close by, we don't realize how much we enjoy that interaction until we get to a part of the country where it doesn't make it conducive to come home, particularly on the holidays. So that's something else I want to touch base with Connor, is that um, you know, are you going to be able to come home? I think, Connor, you're going to be able to come home, it sounds like, at least for a couple of days over the holidays, even with basketball. But that just really is so dependent on who you work with and how supportive are they. Because at Ohio, the philosophy was you're not being paid. You're not our paid employee right now. Bye. You work when the university works, and that's how I was able to, I think, be so happy during during my graduate assistantship. So
Mm-hmm. those are also important things to consider as well. Another question pertaining kind of to your situation that might help others. Someone asked, did going out of state impact your budget at all?
Yeah, so it didn't impact my budget, I would say, significantly in terms of um, I think that I knew what I was getting myself into. I made sure that when I was going through the application process, I was looking at apartments. I was looking at just the cost of living there, and I really do think that I'm a huge fan of Excel documents, looking at your pros and cons and everything on there. And my best suggestion to you on this, if you want to move out of state, how much is a gallon of milk there? How much is a gallon of gas? Or how much are eggs? Like these are some of the questions that are kind of nitty gritty. But as much information as you can gather, and that's why when you apply, and if you do get an opportunity to interview, and especially if you're on campus, go to a Walmart, go to a grocery store. Apartments, like try to make as much time as you can to do these things, because in Ohio I paid $720 or so for my apartment, but it was all inclusive. It was all one price. And I lived in a great place. I really liked where I lived. um, Groceries and things like that weren't too bad, so I never really had to worry too much about the overall cost. But that was because I was in southeastern Ohio. If you're going to be in a suburban area, especially, like Chicago, and you're coming from, um, you know, like Ball State, for example, like me, that'd be a significant pay difference, and you just need to be prepared to be able to make sure that you're not going to have to take out a large amount of loan, even if you are having your schooling paid for and having a graduate assistant stipend.
Thank you for that insight, Lucas. The last question we had from a student was, would you recommend going out of state? So, family ties that are kind of holding you back home.
You know what? I think that in the end, I did exactly what was right for me all around. I reflect on that quite often, but I do think um, for me it was the right move all around. But I did almost feel like I needed to start applying to Indiana schools, like Indiana State and IU, because they were great programs and they were closer. But I knew for me, I needed to get away. I went to a school that I grew up in the same community. So for me, it was far enough away where I felt like I was able to really grow as an individual, but I still had that connection where I was close enough. So that's something that I really think that everyone should consider, at least, is pick a faraway school, and then pick maybe like a little bit closer away. And then when you go and interview, you can just kind of, you know, play it out. I think that the more options you give yourself, the better in some ways, without going excessive, obviously. But for me, I had four schools. Um, One school instantly turned me down. One school I visited, I just knew it wasn't the right for me with Old Dominion. I think we that was not a good fit for either one of us. And then with West Virginia and then Ohio, I just kind of had to pick between the two that I felt like I felt the best um, suited for, and I went with it. But I didn't apply for any schools in Indiana because of that. And I think that if you want to grow as an individual and you want to find out who you are, you have to do something that you've never done before. And living by yourself, or living further away from home and not having a lot of people surrounding you, boy, is it scary. But gosh, it prepares you so much for life. And you really, this is going to sound like, it's kind of like a fundamental, I think, principle. We need to find ourselves as we're going through this transition to practice. We went from having so many people tell us what to do, even if you went to a different school for undergrad. This is just another opportunity that you can grow your network, and you can grow as an individual as well. So it works both professionally and personally. I don't think you're going to go wrong with it if that meets all the other criteria I talked about. And I'm very glad I did, but that was what was best for me. This is something that is going to be potentially a deal breaker for some of you, where you're like, yeah, I don't want to have to get on a plane to be able to go home. That's probably not the right school for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lucas, for that additional insight. that was the last of our questions we had from students. So unless you had anything else that you'd like to just add as a quick sign off, we can close out with this podcast session.
Sure. I just wanted to thank the GLATA Student Senate once again for having me on this. And I also want to thank you, Connor, for thinking of me to be able to give insight. And I also appreciate each one of the students that sent questions to me. And I hope that I answered them appropriately. But please reach out to me via email, or if I provide you with my cell phone, please reach out to me, because ultimately what it comes down to is I want to help you in any way I can.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for viewing in on our podcast for September, and then this follow-up video that came a little bit into October, and then stay tuned for our next Student Senate podcast, which will air in November.